Neon lights flickered over the crowded alien market, casting strange colors on faces, scales, and fur. The air smelled of metal, spice, and something rotten. Ethan walked fast, wanting to finish his delivery and get back to his ship. He had no business here, no interest in what was sold in these shadowy lanes, but his eyes caught something that made him slow down. Behind the bars of a rusted cage, a girl sat on the cold floor. Her skin was pale with a faint silver glow, her long hair falling like liquid light over her shoulders. Her eyes, an unnatural shade of blue, locked onto his the moment he looked. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her gaze was sharp, alive. Around her, other cages held strange creatures, some growling, some crying. But she was still, watching him as if she had been waiting. A heavy-set alien with gray skin and tusks stepped into his path. "You have credits, human? One night. She's yours." His voice was thick, his tone like he was offering nothing more than a drink. Ethan frowned. "I'm not here for that." The alien grinned, showing broken teeth. "Cheap. You'll like her." Ethan almost walked away, but his eyes returned to the girl. She looked too thin, her wrists bruised where the collar bit into her skin. He knew he should keep moving. He was just a cargo pilot, not some hero from old war stories, but the thought of leaving her there in that stinking noise made something twist in his gut. How much? The words were out before he could stop them. The alien named a price low enough to show how little he valued her life. Ethan paid without bargaining. The alien unlocked the cage and the girl stepped out slowly, as if afraid of sudden movements. She didn't thank him, didn't smile. She just followed, her bare feet silent on the metal ground. On the way to his ship, Ethan tried to speak. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. He glanced at her. She was looking around, taking in every alley, every shadow, like someone used to danger. When they reached his ship, she paused at the ramp, hesitating. Inside, Ethan led her to the crew quarters. "You can rest here tonight. There's food in the galley." She stood in the doorway, eyes moving over the room as if checking for traps. Then, in a low, almost broken voice, she said, "If I go back tomorrow, I'll never wake up again." The words hit harder than any punch. He stared at her, but she didn't look at him. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands in her lap. "Why?" he asked. No answer. She just lay down, turning her face to the wall. Later, in the dim light of the galley, Ethan sat alone, staring at his drink. He told himself it wasn't his problem. She'd be safe tonight, she'd eat, and tomorrow he'd take her back. But her words kept echoing in his head. He walked to the crew quarters quietly, meaning only to check if she was asleep. She was curled on her side, breathing slow, but her fingers clutched the blanket like it might be torn from her. A faint scar ran from her jaw down her neck, vanishing under the collar. Back in the cockpit, he tried to distract himself with ship diagnostics, but every time he looked at the clock, the hours felt heavier. Outside, the market's noises faded into the distance. But in his mind, the sound of her voice stayed sharp. "I'll never wake up again." When dawn broke over the alien city, he woke her gently. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't speak at all as he walked her back through the narrow streets. When they reached the market, the gray-skinned alien was waiting, leaning against a post with a grin. Ethan handed over the collar's control device without looking at him. She didn't plead, didn't fight. She just looked at Ethan once, her eyes holding something he couldn't name. Maybe sadness, maybe disappointment, maybe nothing at all. Then she was led back into the cage. Ethan walked away, forcing himself not to turn back. But every step felt wrong, like he was leaving something important behind. The sounds of the market swallowed him, but in his head, the silence of her eyes followed him all the way to his ship. Ethan tried to focus on his work, but the image of her in that cage stayed in his mind like a shadow that would not fade. All day, while checking cargo manifests and running ship repairs, he kept seeing her pale skin, her thin wrists, and the way her eyes had locked on him before he left her. He told himself it was none of his concern. People here lived and died like that every day. The galaxy was too big for one man to fix, but logic did nothing to silence the guilt gnawing at him. That night, the market noise was replaced in his memory by the sound of her voice, soft, quiet, almost afraid, saying she would never wake up if she returned. He replayed those words over and over, wondering what they really meant. He had seen fear before, in soldiers, in smugglers, in prisoners. But hers was different. It was calm, like she had already accepted her fate. When the cargo drop was done, he found himself walking the streets again without really deciding to. His boots clicked against wet stone as he passed dark shops and silent stalls. He stopped outside a food vendor and bought a hot drink, but it tasted like ash in his mouth. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of the marketplace. He told himself he was just going to pass through, maybe find a card game, maybe see if there was a load worth hauling. But as soon as he reached the market, his eyes went to the cage. She was there, sitting in the same position, head lowered, her silver hair hiding her face. The gray-skinned alien saw him and laughed. "Back so soon, human? Did she please you?" Ethan ignored the question. "Why is she here? Who sold her to you?" The alien grinned wider, showing those broken teeth again. "Not your concern. She's mine until I sell her to the warlord. He likes the rare ones." Ethan's stomach tightened. Sell her? To him? He had heard of the warlord. Everyone had. The man was a butcher, collecting living things the way others collected art. Nothing left his palace alive. "She's no good for much else," the alien said casually. "Doesn't talk, doesn't smile. Pretty face, though, and she has the blood. That's what he wants." Ethan didn't understand. "Blood?" The alien leaned closer. "Special, worth more than your ship to the right buyer." The thought of her being taken to that place made something cold settle in his chest. He asked, "How much to buy her outright?" The alien barked a laugh. "You want to keep her? What for? She's trouble, and expensive." He named a price that made Ethan's jaw tighten. It was more than most earned in half a year. Ethan hesitated, thinking of the credits he had saved for repairs, for fuel, for maybe taking a break from hauling cargo. Buying her would strip him of nearly everything. But then he looked at her again. She raised her head slightly, just enough for him to see her eyes. They were tired, but there was something there. Something that made him feel like walking away would be worse than going broke. He transferred the credits without another word. The alien blinked in surprise, then grinned and unlocked the collar. The girl stepped out slowly, like she didn't believe it was real. She glanced at Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Come on," he said quietly. She followed, her movements graceful despite her weakness. The alien called after them, "Don't come back when she brings you trouble." They left the market behind, walking in silence through the dim streets. At one corner, Ethan noticed her looking over her shoulder. "Someone following us?" he asked. She gave a small nod. They walked faster, weaving between alleys until they reached the spaceport. Ethan opened the ship ramp, letting her step inside first. She paused just inside the door, staring at the cargo hold like it was another world. "You're safe now?" he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. She looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "No one is safe from them." "From who?" he asked. Her eyes didn't leave his. "From the people who want me." Then she moved past him into the ship, vanishing into the shadows of the crew quarters. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the door still open to the night, the city's hum echoing outside. He knew she was right. Whatever he had just done, it was not the end of her danger. It was the beginning. Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, the hum of the ship's systems sounding louder than usual. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face in that cage, the bruises on her wrists, the way she had looked over her shoulder on the walk back. He thought about what she had said. No one is safe from them. Whoever them was, she believed it completely. Hours passed. He got up and made himself a drink, then sat in the cockpit staring at the city lights through the viewport. He could leave in the morning, take a cargo job far away, forget all of this. But even thinking about leaving made him feel sick. When the ship's clock showed deep night, he stood up without deciding to. He walked to the crew quarters. She was asleep on the bed, curled up under a blanket. For the first time, she looked peaceful, but even in sleep, her hands were clenched tight, as if she was ready to fight or run. He stepped back, not wanting to wake her, but the thought kept burning in his head. If she stayed here, it would only be a matter of time before someone came looking. And if they found her, it wouldn't just be her life on the line. By morning, he had made a decision. He dressed quickly and headed for the market again. The streets were emptier than the night before, but the air felt heavier, like a storm was coming. He moved fast, ignoring the vendors calling out to him. When he reached the market, the gray-skinned alien was sitting behind a table, counting stacks of credits. The alien looked up and smirked. Back again, human? Don't tell me you want another night. I'm here for her, Ethan said. The smirk froze, then turned into a laugh. You already had your chance. She's not cheap. Ethan stepped closer. Name your price. The alien's eyes narrowed. Why? You planning to sell her yourself? Maybe cut a deal with the warlord? I'm planning to take her away from here, Ethan said, his voice sharp. The alien leaned back, pretending to think. You really want her? Fine, but it'll cost you almost everything you've got. She's rare stock. People like her don't come around often. He named a number so high, Ethan almost swore aloud. Ethan didn't let himself hesitate. He transferred nearly all the credits in his account. The alien checked the payment, grinning when it cleared. Your loss, human. He unlocked the collar with a click. She stepped out slowly, eyes shifting between the two of them. She looked at Ethan like she was trying to understand why he was there. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan didn't have an answer that made sense, so he just said, Let's go. They walked through the market without speaking, the noise around them fading into the background. But Ethan noticed the way her head turned slightly, scanning rooftops, alleys, and doorways. She was watching for danger. When they were a few streets from the spaceport, she stopped. Someone's following us. Ethan glanced back, but saw nothing. Are you sure? Yes, she said. 2 of them. They've been behind us since we left. He tightened his grip on the bag slung over his shoulder and quickened his pace. She matched his steps, her movements fluid despite the weakness he had seen in her before. They turned down a narrow alley, then another, cutting through the maze of streets. The spaceport came into view, its landing bays lit by tall floodlights. Ethan lowered the ramp on his ship and motioned for her to go in first. She hesitated, glancing back toward the shadows. That's when he saw them, 2 tall figures in dark clothing, moving with quiet speed. Ethan hit the ramp control and stepped inside, locking the hatch behind them. She stood in the middle of the cargo bay, her breathing fast but steady. They won't stop, she said. They'll follow us anywhere. Then we'll make it hard for them, Ethan replied, moving to the cockpit. She followed, standing behind his chair as he started the engines. As the ship lifted off, the city lights fell away beneath them. Ethan set a course for the outer rim, somewhere far from this system. He didn't know exactly where they were going, only that they needed to disappear. She stayed quiet for a while, watching the stars through the viewport. Finally, she said, You should have left me. He looked at her, meeting those strange blue eyes. Couldn't. She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened, just for a moment. Then she turned away, as if hiding it. Ethan didn't press her. He knew trust would take time. As the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Ethan leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He had spent nearly everything he had, made himself a target, and taken on a danger he didn't understand. But as he looked toward the crew quarters, where she now sat quietly in the dim light, he knew he wouldn't change his choice. The ship's engines hummed steady, but Ethan's mind was anything but calm. He kept checking the radar, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Beside him, she sat silently, her hands resting in her lap, but her eyes moved constantly, studying every control, every blinking light, as if memorizing the ship's layout. Hours passed before she finally spoke. They will come for us. Not tonight, maybe, but they will. Ethan glanced at her. Then we'll be ready. She shook her head slowly. You don't understand. They don't stop. Once they decide you belong to them, they'll cross any border, break any law. You're not safe because you have a ship. You're in more danger now than before. He didn't argue, though part of him wanted to. Instead, he focused on plotting a course to a remote fueling station. It was far from major trade routes and rarely visited. If they could disappear there for a while, maybe they could plan their next move. As the hours stretched on, she began to relax, at least outwardly. Ethan noticed her shoulders weren't as tense, and she even accepted a meal from him without hesitation. But when they landed at the fueling station, her guard shot back up. The place was nearly deserted, just a few cargo haulers and a handful of alien mechanics. The air smelled of burnt oil and metal dust. Ethan paid for fuel while she stayed close, scanning every face they passed. They were halfway back to the ship when the first shadow moved. At first, Ethan thought it was just a worker, but then a glint of metal flashed in the dim light. A weapon. Run, she whispered sharply. Ethan didn't need telling twice. They sprinted toward the ship, boots pounding against the metal deck. A shot rang out, sizzling past his ear and hitting the wall with a burst of sparks. He grabbed her arm and pulled her into a side corridor, weaving between stacked crates. The sound of footsteps followed. More than one set. Whoever these people were, they knew exactly who they were chasing. She took the lead suddenly, darting through a narrow maintenance tunnel Ethan didn't even know was there. "This way," she said quickly. "They won't expect us to know these paths." They crawled through the cramped space, emerging behind a row of fuel tanks near the ship's rear hatch. Ethan keyed in the override code, and the hatch slid open with a hiss. They scrambled inside just as the first pursuer rounded the corner. Ethan slammed the hatch shut and locked it. Seconds later, something hit the door hard from the outside. "They're going to try to breach it," Ethan said, running to the cockpit. She was right behind him, already strapping into the co-pilot seat. "Strap in," he warned, powering the engines to maximum. The ship roared to life, and they lifted off fast, the ground vanishing beneath them. The radar lit up with two small blips, ships taking off in pursuit. Ethan angled the ship toward the asteroid belt that stretched across the system. It was risky, but it could hide them. The pursuers followed, closing in. She looked at the readings and pointed. "There, a dense cluster. If you cut the power and drift, they might lose our trail." It was a dangerous move, but Ethan trusted her. He cut the main engines, letting the ship glide silently into the dark rocks. The only sound was the faint thud of his heartbeat in his ears. The pursuers flew past, scanning in the wrong direction. Minutes later, their signals faded from the radar. Ethan let out a slow breath and powered the engines again. "You've done this before," he said, looking at her. Her eyes met his. "Escaping? Hiding? Yes, too many times." He didn't press her for more details. He could tell her past was a maze of things she didn't want to talk about. But he also saw something else. A sharp mind, quick reflexes, and the ability to survive. As the ship left the asteroid belt, Ethan felt the weight of their situation settle on him. This wasn't just about keeping her hidden anymore. Whoever wanted her had the resources to send hunters across systems. That meant they had money, power, and influence. She leaned back in her seat, her voice quieter now. "This won't end until one of us is dead." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. "Or until we make sure they can't come after you again." Her gaze stayed on him, as if weighing his words, testing if he really meant them. Finally, she nodded once, slow and deliberate. Ethan knew what that meant. They weren't just running anymore. They were going to fight back. The stars outside the viewport drifted slowly as the ship traveled through the quiet dark. Ethan sat in the pilot's chair, but his mind was on the girl sitting a few feet away. She was silent, her knees pulled up, eyes fixed on the endless black beyond the glass. For hours, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "You said they won't stop. Who exactly are they?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers tightened on the blanket around her shoulders. "They're not just traders. They're part of a network. People who buy and sell lives like cargo. My own people gave me to them." That last part made him look at her sharply. "Your own people?" She nodded slowly. "A debt had to be paid. They decided I was worth more to them as payment than as family. They sold me because of my blood." Ethan frowned. "What's so special about your blood?" She hesitated, then said, "It carries markers, traits that make it valuable to certain buyers. To them, I'm not a person, I'm property. And if the warlord gets me, I'll never see the sun again." Ethan's jaw tightened. He thought about the cage, the way she had spoken on that first night. It made sense now, why she seemed so certain she wouldn't survive much longer. She continued, her voice low but steady. "I was part of a noble house once. I had protection, comfort, but power changes hands fast in my world. My family fell, and with them, my freedom. I've been traded between owners for years." He could hear the bitterness in her tone, but also the strength. She hadn't broken, not completely. She was still here, still alive. "And the information you carry?" he asked. "You hinted before that you know something dangerous." Her gaze flicked to him, sharp and searching. "Yes, I know names, deals, things that could destroy some of the most powerful people in the sector. That's why I'm valuable, and why I'm a threat." Ethan leaned back, trying to process it. She wasn't just some unlucky captive. She was a living piece of leverage, a secret wrapped in skin. Keeping her safe wasn't only about protecting her, it was about keeping those secrets out of the wrong hands. She studied him carefully. "You don't have to stay. You could drop me on a quiet planet and walk away. You've already done more than anyone else." He shook his head. "Not happening." Something in her eyes softened at that, though she quickly looked away. "Then you should know this. If you keep me with you, they'll put a price on your head, and they'll make sure it's high enough to tempt every bounty hunter from here to the outer rim." "I'll take my chances," Ethan said simply. They spent the next few days keeping to back routes, avoiding main stations. She began to move more freely around the ship, helping with basic maintenance, asking questions about navigation. She was curious, smart, and quick to learn. One evening, while Ethan was repairing a loose conduit in the engine room, she appeared with 2 mugs of something warm. "It's not human tea," she said, "but it's good for strength." He took it, surprised. "Thanks." She leaned against the wall, watching him work. "Why did you really come back for me?" He paused, then shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe because I couldn't stand the thought of you going back to that cage. Maybe because I've seen enough bad things in this galaxy to know that sometimes you can change one of them." Her lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Most people wouldn't risk their credits or their life for a stranger." "Most people aren't me," he replied. The ship's quiet routine was broken 2 nights later. Ethan picked up a faint signal on the scanner, too faint for a normal transmission. When he adjusted the settings, he caught pieces of a coded message. Whoever it was, they were tracking the ship's trajectory. He shut down the lights in the cockpit and called her in. She took one look at the readings and said, "It's them." "They found us?" She nodded. "They must have planted a tag somewhere on the ship when we were at the fueling station." Ethan cursed under his breath and got up, searching the cargo bay. It didn't take long to find a small black disc hidden behind a panel. She took it from his hand, studied it, then crushed it under her heel. "That won't stop them completely," she said. "They'll guess where we're heading." Ethan thought quickly. "Then we change course. Somewhere they won't expect." She tilted her head. "And where would that be?" He gave her a thin smile. "Home." It wasn't really home. Ethan didn't have one anymore. But there was a small outpost on the edge of a dead system, run by a man who owed him more than one favor. If anyone could help them hide for a while, it was him. She didn't argue, but later as she sat in the co-pilot's seat, her voice was quiet. "You know this will get worse before it gets better." "I know," he said, and he meant it. But he also knew something else. He wasn't letting her go. Not now. Not ever. The outpost came into view as a small cluster of lights floating in the dark. From a distance, it looked abandoned, just a forgotten speck on the edge of space. Ethan guided the ship in slowly, careful not to broadcast their approach. The comms stayed silent until they were close enough for the docking beacons to pick them up. A crackling voice came through the speakers. "Who's coming in without clearance?" Ethan replied calmly. "Old friend with a favor to cash in." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Dock in Bay 3. You owe me a drink." The bay was dimly lit, the walls streaked with years of oil and rust. As the ramp lowered, the smell of metal and stale air rolled in. Waiting for them was a tall man with a weathered face and one mechanical arm. "Ethan," he said with a grin. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Good to see you too, Jarek," Ethan replied, stepping down. Jarek's eyes shifted to the girl behind him. She kept her hood up, her posture tense. "This her?" he asked quietly. "She's under my protection," Ethan said firmly. Jarek studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then she's safe here. For now." They followed him through the narrow corridors to a small room that smelled faintly of old coffee. Jarek poured drinks while Ethan explained the situation, leaving out some of the more dangerous details. Jarek didn't interrupt, but his face grew darker with each word. When Ethan finished, Jarek leaned back. "You know what you've done, right? Every major hunter in the sector will have your face in their sights." Ethan shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time." The girl spoke for the first time since arriving. "They'll come here. They always find me." Jarek looked at her with something like pity. "Then we make sure they regret it." The next 2 days were spent reinforcing the outpost's defenses. Motion sensors were placed in the outer corridors. Blast doors tested, hidden escape routes mapped. The girl surprised Ethan with her skill. She knew how to check energy couplings, reroute power, and even spot flaws in the outpost's security grid. "You've done this before," Ethan said as she adjusted a sensor mount. She didn't look at him. "When you've been hunted long enough, you learn how to survive." That night, as they ate in the mess hall, the comms crackled with an incoming transmission. Jarek's face tightened as he listened. Small ship dropped out of warp just beyond the asteroid field. No ID signal. Ethan's stomach sank. "They found us." Jarek moved quickly, shutting down unnecessary systems to make the outpost look empty. But the girl shook her head. "It won't work. They'll send a scouting party to check." Minutes later, the outer sensors pinged, movement in the docking tunnels. Ethan grabbed his blaster, and Jarek handed one to the girl. "You ever use one of these?" Jarek asked. She checked the weapon's charge and replied simply, "Yes." The first attackers came through fast, black-armored and silent. Ethan and Jarek opened fire, forcing them back. The girl stayed low, waiting for the perfect shot before dropping an enemy with a blast to the chest. She moved with precision, wasting no energy. The fighting was close and sharp. One of the attackers tried to flank them through a side passage, but she was already there, her blaster raised. The man froze when he saw her, his weapon trembling. She didn't hesitate. One shot, and he was down. After what felt like hours, the last of them fell. The corridors were littered with scorch marks and the smell of burned metal. Jarek checked the scanners, no more heat signatures inside. Ethan lowered his weapon, breathing hard. He looked at her. "You saved my life in there." She met his gaze steadily. "Now we're even." Jarek came over, shaking his head. "That was a scout team if I'm out. The real trouble will be here soon." Ethan knew he was right. This wasn't over, not even close. But something had changed. She wasn't just someone he was protecting anymore. She was a partner now, someone he could trust to watch his back. As they worked to repair the damaged corridors, she spoke quietly to him. "When they come again, we shouldn't just defend. We should make them afraid to chase us." Ethan gave her a slow smile. "Now you're talking my language." Outside the outpost, the cold stars waited. Somewhere out there, more hunters were already on their way. But for the first time, Ethan didn't just feel like they were running. He felt like they had a chance to fight and win. The warning came just after dawn. Jarek burst into the small room where Ethan and the girl were resting, his mechanical arm whirring as he moved. "They're here," he said. "Big ship, heavily armed. If they land, we won't hold them." Ethan was already on his feet, pulling on his jacket. The girl rose too, calm but alert. "Then we don't let them land," she said. They hurried to the control room. Through the viewport, a dark shape slid out of the asteroid shadows. A hunter carrier, its black hull gleaming faintly in the starlight. Smaller craft detached from it, moving toward the outpost like sharp blades. Ethan leaned over the console. "We can't outgun them. We'll have to outthink them." The girl's eyes scanned the tactical display. The docking tunnel is their only safe entry point. If we overload the power conduits inside, it'll fry their systems when they try to dock. Jarek nodded. "It'll also fry half our station." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Do it." While Jarek worked on the conduit overload, Ethan and the girl armed themselves. They moved through the dim corridors, placing small charges in choke points, creating narrow kill zones. She moved with practiced efficiency, every action smooth, no wasted motion. The first hunter ship reached the docking tunnel. Alarms blared as it latched on. Sparks burst from the walls, and the lights flickered. Then the overload hit, a blast of white light and a roar of power. The hunter craft shuddered, smoke pouring from its vents. "They're disabled," Jarek's voice came over the comm, "but more are on the way." The next wave came in fast. This time, they bypassed the tunnel and tried to cut through the outer hull. Ethan and the girl took position in a side corridor, blasters ready. The metal wall glowed red, then burst open, and black-armored figures poured through. Blaster fire lit the corridor. Ethan dropped one attacker, then another. The girl moved beside him, her shots precise and deadly. An enemy tried to rush her with a blade, but she sidestepped, slammed her elbow into his helmet, and fired point blank. They fell back slowly, forcing the hunters to fight for every meter. In the chaos, one of the attackers shouted her name. Not the one Ethan knew, but something strange and formal. She froze for a fraction of a second, then shot him before he could say more. When they reached the inner blast door, Jarek triggered the charges they had planted earlier. The corridor behind them erupted in fire and debris, sealing it off. The attack slowed, but it wasn't over. The carrier outside began charging its main gun, aiming to destroy the entire outpost. "They'll level the place," Jarek warned. "We've got maybe 3 minutes." The girl stepped forward. "Then we hit them first." Ethan turned to her. "How?" She pointed at the tactical screen. "Their main gun draws power from a central core. If we overload that core, it'll shut down everything and maybe cripple the whole ship." Jarek frowned. "That means boarding them, through open space, while they're firing at us." Ethan looked at her, and she looked back without fear. "Let's do it," she said. Minutes later, they were in spacesuits, moving through the cold dark on small maneuver thrusters. The carrier loomed ahead, massive and silent. They landed on its hull near a maintenance hatch. Ethan cut the lock, and they slipped inside. The corridors were silent, but they could hear the deep thrum of the ship's power core. They moved fast, staying in the shadows, taking down 2 guards without a sound. The core chamber was huge, lit by a swirling blue glow. Cables as thick as tree trunks ran from it into the walls. The girl knelt by the control panel, her hands moving quickly. "Cover me," she said. Ethan watched the door, tension coiling in his chest. Footsteps echoed, shouts in a language he didn't know. The first guard came through, and Ethan fired, dropping him instantly. "I need 30 more seconds," she called. Blaster bolts scorched the walls. Ethan returned fire, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. Then she stood up, eyes fierce. "Done. Let's go." They ran as alarms screamed through the ship. Behind them, the power core overloaded, the lights flickered, and the ship shuddered violently. By the time they reached the hatch and launched back into space, the carrier's main gun went dark. They returned to the outpost just as the crippled carrier began drifting away, its smaller ships retreating into the asteroid belt. Inside, Jarek met them with a grin. "You two just made a lot of enemies." The girl removed her helmet, her silver hair falling loose. She looked at Ethan for a long moment. "Enemies I've had all my life. But now, I have someone to fight them with." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're not going back to running, are you?" She shook her head. "Not with you." For the first time since he met her, there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. She wasn't just someone he had bought to save for one night. She was his partner, his responsibility, and maybe something more. As the outpost settled into uneasy quiet, Ethan realized one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Forever.